It's hard to keep your dignity when you've been dumped. But the exes in this video let it fly straight out the window. This collection of stories about brutal reactions to a breakup will leave your jaw on the floor, and as the last story proves, even when years have passed without contact and you think they're long gone, they can still pop right back up, more deranged than ever. I had a buddy whose ex, upon breaking up, raced him back to his house, got there first, and then proceeded to lock herself in his room for several days. I don't even think she talked much while there. She would just sneak out at nighttime to use the bathroom. Listen, am I glad it wasn't me and that I didn't have to deal with this? Yes. But do I simultaneously admire the creativity and sheer tenacity of will here? Also yes. This happened to my neighbors. They were a couple who went through a divorce, and she got the house in the settlement. However, it was only the house and land it sat directly on, not the surrounding land, as that went to the husband. That's how he got his revenge on her. The first thing he did was sell all the lumber off the rest of the land. She went from living in a nice forest to living on clear-cut land, but he wasn't done yet. Once the trees were gone, he sold off the topsoil, then the gravel under that. By the time he was done, her house was on a hill overlooking a barren landscape, reminiscent of the lunar surface. This was many, many years ago, but I happened to drive back last week after not passing by for a long time. The place is still hideous. Petty people, take note. This is how you do it. I'm not sure I've heard of an act of revenge this insidious and brilliant. Years ago, in the late 90s, I discovered my girlfriend's awful secret. I'd already been living with her for a year when I found out she'd been sleeping with her boss. The timing could not have been worse. It was the week of our Super Bowl party. We both had plenty of guests coming. We'd been planning it for over a month. I'd spent almost an entire paycheck buying every type of booze that we thought anyone would want. We were young, up-and-coming professionals. She was just under 21, not able to buy the hard stuff. She pulled me aside and broke up with me on the Friday before that weekend. I saw it coming. She left to go to the beach with her boss and told me to move on Super Bowl weekend, so I came up with a plan. I called my people and moved to the party. I took all of my furniture, everything but one TV, bed, one glass, and one chair. That was it. She had no dishes, nothing. The place was bare. It took me many hockey bags to move the bottles of booze, but we drank for weeks with it. And that's not the best part. I heard she had her own party with everyone showing up to one bottle, one glass, one chair, and nothing else. You can cheat, you can lie, but there's one thing you can't do. Steal a man's Super Bowl party. I hope those drinks tasted extra good. My ex took all my shower stuff while I was at work. And not just the shampoo and body wash. She also took the shower curtain, the rod, all that stuff, and the toilet bowl scrubber. She took it all. So when I came home, I said, okay, I'm not letting her take any more of my stuff. So I changed the locks. While I was at work that night, she called and said she needed to get in the apartment to get her things. I tell her, no, not without me there. I don't want you taking my stuff. She says she'll call the police. I knew just what to do. I tell her, go ahead. A couple of cops show up at my work and ask what's going on. I show them my lease with only my name on it, and they say, okay, we'll have her when she comes back tomorrow. Call us when she shows up. I thought she might give up, but I was wrong. She comes the next day and tells me she's taking my bed worth $700. I told her no, she didn't pay for it. I had my credit statement printed ready to show the officers. She still tries to argue that she's taking the bed. The officers say, look, you're not taking it. If you think you deserve it, take him to court. She then tries arguing with the guy. The officer says, did you hear me right? Take him to the court. Luckily, she listened that time, and I never heard from her again. We agreed that she'd collect her stuff from our place when we broke without me being there. I arrived later that evening to make a seriously disturbing discovery. She'd left 2 gas valves open, so I guess I'm lucky I didn't light a cigarette. I considered it, but I didn't call the authorities. How would I prove it anyway? At that point, I was just glad she was out of there and out of my life, and still am. So I decided to ignore it and not sound like a lunatic wailing at an officer about a murderous girlfriend. Believe me, at this point, we'd been through enough. It's hard to accept that there's no justice for something like this, but like the OP said, sometimes it's just easier to walk away. There was a couple who lived across the street from my family when I was younger. She was friends with my mom, and he helped my dad install our pool. Turns out they were having some issues, and while she was out of town for work, he gutted their entire kitchen. I mean, walls, appliances, ceiling, everything. So she comes back, finds it, they argue, and she moves out and moves in with her mom. Through court dealings, she ends up back in the house. But he's going to get the house eventually. I was only 13 or so I don't remember the specifics. Just days before he's supposed to move back in, my parents help her move all of the furniture that she bought before they got married, which was literally everything besides the mattress and one recliner. That's all he was left with when he moved back in. But it didn't end there. After he moved back in and the divorce was final, he went through a phase where he had another woman living with him, but she also had a boyfriend who would frequently visit. One of the last times we saw any of them was around midnight one night. The neighbor, the boyfriend, and an apparent third party had some sort of loud, drunken lovers' quarrel. I don't know what happened inside the house after we called 911, but I saw the aftermath. All three left in a police car after being tased. Imagine destroying your own kitchen out of spite. It seems like even the most normal people go absolutely insane during a divorce. But hey, based on what happened after the wife left, maybe this guy was always a bit loony. I didn't know it, but she broke into my house every day for a month while I was at work. She showered, cooked food, watched TV, and then left before I got home. I came home early one day, and that's when I discovered her. She was sitting on the couch watching TV. She very matter-of-factly said, "Oh, I didn't think you'd be home at this time." I asked how she got in. When we were dating, I had lent her my keys once. She got one cut for herself without me knowing. The craziest part? After arguing, we made up. Being with a crazy person can be fun for a little while, but I quickly realized I was in way over my head and broke up with her one final time. And got my key back. This is called playing with fire. I can't believe this guy got back together with his breaking and entering ex after getting that surprise. I'd run for the hills. Me and my ex were high school sweethearts. She was my first and I was hers. We had been together for 5 years and been living together for 3 years when she broke it off. She waited about 4 weeks before she started dating someone else. But it was who she dated that was the problem. He was my best friend, whom I had known since kindergarten. Me and my friend had always been very close. He talked with me when she broke it off, consoled me, played the good guy, while he and she were dating behind my back the whole time. This was a friend I was hanging out with almost daily for my whole life, Skyping, playing all the new games together. We even went to the same schools just to be able to study the same things. I didn't see it coming and was heartbroken when it ended. Even worse, she took all of our stuff and moved out the same day. I was left in complete awe and didn't even manage to put up a fight before she had 90% of everything we owned together. She even took my best friend. He just stopped talking to me after a few weeks, and I haven't heard from either of them for 4 years now. The most heartbreaking part? I did eventually find out they were dating, of course, but I didn't know that they started so soon after we broke up until a mutual friend told me a year later. I guess it isn't as messed up as many of these stories here, but it left me devastated. What really sickens me is that she took my best friend. She could have had everything else, but why my best friend? Stealing property is one thing. That you can replace. I can't imagine what it's like to lose your partner and your best friend in one fell swoop. What a twisted thing to do. On my first night in a new city, I called my mom to tell her I arrived safely. She tells me that a girl I dated when I was 16 or 17 called out of the blue looking for me and left her number. At this point, I was 23 years old and hadn't heard a peep from her in about 5 years. Lonely and bored, I rang her up and had a strange catch-up session. She told me she was engaged to a woman and that her life after we broke up was a series of unfortunate events. We hung up on pleasant terms with no plans to keep in touch. 3 days later, I was exiting my building and I'm greeted by a chilling sight. Who is standing there in the rain waiting? Yep, her. She had flown 2,500 miles in the middle of the night because she thought we were destined to be together. It gets even more disturbing. She told me how she was so torn up about us not being together that she had pulled out all of her hair down there. She also brought her fiancé, who was as crazy as she was, and was urging my ex to have a baby with me. I calmly tried to tell her that this was insane and that I had no interest in any of this, when out of nowhere, everything goes black. I woke up to chaos. The doorman of my building was holding the fiancé down, waiting for paramedics and the police to arrive. Later, he came to see me in the hospital and told me what had happened. It turns out she had hit me on the back of the head with a full bottle of champagne they had brought to celebrate with. Restraining orders followed. Well, that was a roller coaster. This makes destroyed property and lost friendships seem run-of-the-mill. I can't say I saw a single twist of this story coming before it happened, and I can only pray to never end up dating anyone as insane as this guy's ex. She was a smoke show, but absolutely crazy. She would lie about the dumbest things. What she had for breakfast, family members, the car she was working on. Okay, lady. Anyway, enough was enough, so I decided to call it quits. But she wasn't done with me yet. A few weeks passed and my youth pastor from my church came to my school, a private Christian college prep school, and pulled me out of class. He sits me down to have a serious conversation, and I'm so confused. He asks me what I'm going to do about this girl and the baby, and I start laughing my head off. He's a cool dude, but he got furious. He knows I'm not a virgin at this point, and I've talked to this guy about everything under the sun. I explained myself, and then I got to witness a priceless moment. His face went from pure rage directed at me to pure rage directed at her when I told him we never even did the deed. Apparently, she had started going to my church in the middle of the week to seek God and told him she was pregnant with my child and so on. So my youth pastor did the only logical thing he could after I told him the truth. He caught her red-handed in her lie and told her mother. I love hearing stories about pathological liars getting caught. Each time it's like, did you really think you're going to get away with it? Like, what was she going to do in 9 months? I love how this guy handled it, and how he even got the pastor on his side. I had an ex show up at my parents' house. I was 19 and living with them, and demand we work things out. I asked her to leave, and she refused. I grabbed my then 11-year-old brother, put him in my car, and tried to leave. Her reaction was seriously deranged. She blocked the driveway with her body, so I had to drive in the yard. She then got mad that I left and drove to my mother's work to talk to her about it. But she didn't stop there. After my mom told her to leave her work, she shows back up at my house and refuses to leave again. I locked up the house and she sat on the porch swing for 3 hours before my stepfather arrived home from work, tossed some gas money at her, and told her to get the heck off his property. She was absolutely crazy. When all else fails, become a human roadblock. The stepdad throwing gas money at her to get her out of there has to be the funniest part. Hey, at least it worked. My ex called one day and told me that the power company wouldn't give her an account until she paid the remainder of the bill from when we lived together, so she decided that was my responsibility. She called, I could tell her new boyfriend was sitting with her, and told me that I needed to pay the bill for her new place. This was my moment. I told her, okay, hold on a sec. Looking at the bills from when we lived together, let's start with April. I paid this much and you didn't pay, so take half of that. May, I paid this much and you didn't pay, so take half of that. June, I paid this much and you didn't pay, so take half of that. I kept going. She said nothing. When I finished, I said, so it looks like you owe me about $1,000. I continued, so you can either send me that money or deal with your own bill on your own." She said okay and hung up. I never heard one word about it after that. Now, that's what I call a power move. But corny jokes aside, this takes keeping the receipts to the next level. Math may not be my strong suit, but boy do I love it when it gets used for revenge like this. I met this girl over the internet on one of those stupid social sites. She lived in the same country as me and has roughly the same musical taste as me, so I thought, why the heck not, and met her. She was nice, and we fell in love as much as preteens can love and had a relationship for about 11 months. But there was a dark side. She suffered from depression, and when she was really not feeling great, she'd get really jealous and accuse me of things I wasn't doing. Eventually, she broke up with me because she was not sure I wasn't going to cheat on her. I was honestly kind of glad to be rid of her, but that wasn't the end of it. She called me a few days later because she wanted me back, but I was sick of her crazy behavior and I told her so. Well, rule 1 for crazy people: do not call anything they do crazy. There were a few days of relative calm with just a bunch of angry texts, guilt trips, and stuff like that. 4 days after calling her behavior crazy was my half day at school, so I got home early and had the house to myself. There was a knock at the door, and since I was waiting for a package, I didn't think much of it. I opened the door. That's when I got a chilling surprise. The next thing I know, I am standing with my back pressed against the door I'd just hastily closed again, my shirt red with blood. My ex had brought a sharpened hockey stick and tried to slash at me with it. I luckily only opened the door a bit and have relatively fast reflexes. What otherwise would have been a deep cut through my throat was merely a flesh wound. The end of the story was a call to the police, a trip to the hospital, a restraining order, psychiatric help for her, and a deep mistrust of people for the longest time. Well now, there's a twist. Sure, the OP did warn us that she was crazy, but I still didn't see that one coming. Thank God for restraining orders. We were together for 5 years and engaged for 3 before we broke up. Nothing like sitting at work on your second day when you get a phone call from the state hospital saying they have your fiancé. We had been split up for 2 months because he was terrible to me and also just plain crazy. I asked to be excused from work, which they were surprisingly okay with, and drove across town. I couldn't believe what I learned when I got there. He was in the locked ward. I asked what he did, seeing as he seemed to be physically unharmed. It turns out he was caught by security trying to jump off a building. I went in to see him, and what he said made my blood run cold. He told me that if I didn't get back with him, that there was no point in living. I told him that there was no chance I was marrying him, but I'd always be there as a support. I called his mother, who lived interstate, and demanded she come and collect him. As crazy as he was, he didn't belong in a place like that, with people who were so far gone they were more disorder than person. They would only release him into the care of someone else, and I told him it wasn't going to be me, and that was the end of it. The last time I saw him was just a few hours before his flight back home. He asked for just a few hours of normal, so we cooked dinner, talked about mundane stuff, went to volleyball together with our friends, and then at the end of our game, his mom stood at the doorway and collected him, and he left. I guess you could say the worst thing he did wasn't trying to emotionally manipulate me. It was giving me a taste of what could have been, allowing me to feel something right before he left my life. Make no mistake, I am far better off out of the relationship, but that departure ruined me for a long time. It's one thing when you can just write off the ex because all the love is gone, but it's pretty sad to watch someone you still might have feelings for go completely off the deep end. I can't blame the OP for hurting. What a tough situation. My ex was a lunatic. Probably still is. The very definition of a lunatic. He was a classic jerk, and I fell for it for a while, which was a shame, but I wised up and dumped him. Then things took a terrifying turn. He started coming over, knocking on the door. I was on the ground floor, so it was right by the living room window. He'd call my name and try to get me to let him in and talk to him. I got paranoid and had my blinds closed a lot. It seems like a common or garden type of please take me back, please thing, right? But here's the weirdest part. After a couple of instances, I realized that all his visits had one thing in common. It was a full moon. He'd come over every few weeks during the full moon. It got so I could predict him turning up. He also jumped me on my way home once, so I got the police involved. I never told them about the moon thing because I was embarrassed for some reason, but I didn't know where he lived, so they couldn't even find him. Eventually, I moved across the city to get away. The move date was during a different moon phase, so I could relax and pack and just go without worrying about him turning up. I kind of wish I could have seen his face when he inevitably turned up at the full moon. I recently talked about this to an acquaintance who I knew had been to court over her being stalked by her ex. I tentatively brought up the moon thing. Her answer blew me away. She said, "Oh yeah, mine would do that too. It's a thing." Sorry, were these women dating werewolves without realizing it? I knew crazy behavior on full moons was a thing, but didn't expect that it also extended to exes. My ex was a nightmare, but we split up years ago and I figured that was all in the past. Well, today a strange letter came in the mail. I opened it and my blood ran cold. I knew my ex was evil, but this was cruel even for her. It turns out that, shortly after our split, but before the divorce was final, she'd reopened several credit cards that we'd paid off and closed in order to make our divorce smooth. Somehow she opened them back up in my name and charged them to the max, then moved out of state and stopped making payments. All of these things ended up getting reported to my credit years later, and pretty much ruined any chance for decent credit for the next 7 to 10 years in the US. I've been divorced and lived outside the US for 8 years now, and only recently found out about all of these charges. I know all this can be corrected eventually, but the hassle of explaining things to several credit card companies and collection agencies is such a major pain. Like, not only are you ruining someone's credit, you're putting them in bureaucratic hell. Maybe I just hate waiting on hold more than the average person, but I'd call this one straight up evil. That's our last tale of post-breakup delirium for today, but keep checking back for more wild and wonderful real-life stories. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video.